talking about reunions, I had one recently. It was a 50th college reunion. Now, in preparation for the 50th college reunion, we had a 48th college reunion, and that was the first one we'd had in 48 years, which was 2 years ago. If you've ever been to a reunion, it's kind of a shocking experience. I mean, there were a bunch of old people there. I was just chagrined. I mean, these were people that were kind of walking with, we all had to have pictures of ourselves of what we looked like 48 years ago, or we wouldn't have known anyone. And so the first reunion was kind of like shock therapy, okay? we were just kind of shocked in positive ways in some ways and some not so positive ways in other ways. But the reality is that it was a great time. But we decided that because we were getting older that it probably would be good not to have another reunion in 48 more years later, so that we thought maybe we ought to get together every couple of years because we really did enjoy one another's company. So we came to the second reunion, which was just a few weeks ago down in Florida. And a couple of them had discovered that I'm kind of a people person, and just a few. But no, they asked me if I'd kind of coordinate a discussion, just kind of lead in a discussion of during one part of the reunion. And what I did was I reminded them of some words that appear oftentimes in the poetical literature of the scriptures. Oftentimes you'll see, especially in Psalms and Proverbs, you'll see three words that appear in the same verse that all seem to be synonyms, but they all seem to be also quite different, or otherwise why would you have three words in the same verse? So I'm going to read one of those verses to you. It's in the book of Proverbs. And it goes like this. The wise lay up knowledge. So that's the word that I would kind of circle if you had your Bibles open. But the mouth of a fool brings ruin near. On the lips of him who has understanding, circle, wisdom, circle, is found. So you have three words circled: knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. So as we were all gathered in this room, I said, we graduated from college, from Bible college. We had Bible college, degrees. And we left Bible college 50-some or 40-some years ago, and we had a lot of knowledge. We kind of knew a lot about God. In other words, I had good grades in theology and in the courses that I took. And we knew about God. We knew that He had characteristics that were wonderful and significant. We talked about His omnipotence, and we talked about His omniscience, and we talked about other characters, that made up the nature of God. And we knew a lot about God. We knew that He loved us. We knew He was gracious. We knew He was merciful. And we could say those words, and we could say them with conviction, well, at least a level of conviction, because we didn't understand them all, but we knew about them. And there's a lot of things that we know about God. And then I said, and now it's 50 years later, and we're beginning to understand God. You see, we knew Him, but we really didn't understand Him. We knew that He loved us, but we hadn't experienced His love in the variety of situations that would confront us in the context of the intermediate 50 years that would cause us to say, I loved Jesus then as much as I could love Him as a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old, but now I really understand this God who gave Himself for me. And so, but in the middle, it got really kind of ugly. There were times when it was good. There were times that it was bad. There was times that it was incredibly hard. There were times that we wanted to quit. There were times that we did quit. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today as I was talking to them. Because I would like just to hear your stories of how, in that period of time, God produced something in you that you didn't have when we graduated 50 years ago. And the stories were incredible. They were very, very sad stories. They were joyful stories. All of us had crises in our lives. All of us had things that we had to deal with that were very unpleasant, and there were blessings along the way. And that's just part of the journey. And so I define trials. Trials, those were the things that we endured. I define trials as the things that cause us to integrate what it is that we know about something, what we know about God, into the practical situations where we find ourselves, because that's what trials are. We're constantly, trying to figure out what it is that we know, how do we integrate that, how do we use that in ways that are going to enable us to have a greater understanding of God. I mean, think about, going to school and we were learning math. We were learning all these mathematical ways of being able to change things and to do things that we didn't otherwise know how to do. And we learned about equations, and we learned about all these things that would enable us to be effective in our lifetime. And how many of you walked out of the math class and said something like, I'll never use this again in my life? And yet there were those little exercises that were in the middle that we just kind of used the exercises, and as a result of the exercise we could see how that principle of math could be applied to this particular problem, and the end result would be something that would change. And so I think when James says in James chapter 1, count it all joy when you fall into diverse trials. The trials, sometimes we think of them as the miserable things, and they certainly are miserable sometimes. But it could just be anything. The temptation to cheat, the temptation to lie or to exaggerate, the temptation to do any number of things, and we're left to try to figure out how does that, that temptation, that trial, that opportunity to integrate what it is that we know into a practical situation, how does it work? And what happens when it does work, and what happens when it doesn't work in relationships to the character that God is continually developing within us. And so I think it all meets together. I think James, or 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, think of it this way, there has no trial overtaken you, but it's just common to man. But God is faithful, who will suffer to be tried, not above your abilities, but will with the trial also make a means of being able to escape so that you might be able to bear it. And that's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful promise. But in the midst of all of that, it gets really confusing and it gets really, really, really messy. And in the midst of it, when we don't know what to do, James gives us the answer. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who loves to give it to you. He gives it liberally and doesn't resent the fact that we come to him and ask for it. But ask in faith, without wavering. Don't be like the cork on the seashore that just is bouncing all around, but trust him to do what it is that he's promised to do. Now, I think that's been a lesson for life for me, because I thought a lot about those words over the years, and as we began to share them together in the context of our little class, that graduated from a little tiny Bible college 50 years ago, we were able to kind of come to an understanding of the fact that in the midst of all of it, God was there. Now, there's a principle in what it is we're talking about here today, because something, you have learned some things about development here. And now you're going to go back, and the challenge is, how do I integrate that which I know about some of these principles that Jerry's talked about, some of the things that you can do? How do I integrate that into my world? Because not all of our worlds are the same. How do I take what it is that I learned here this week, and how do I apply it over here? And to the degree that you begin to do that, you begin to understand it better. But somewhere in the middle, it's going to get messy and it's going to get difficult, and you're going to have, and then you cry out for wisdom. Lord, help me to understand how I can take this principle and apply it into this situation so that hopefully this result might occur. And so I hope that you understand that, this is a process. When I was in seminary, I had to get a job, because that's what you have to do in order to be able to survive while you're going to school. And so I had to have a job to pay tuition. I had to have a job to take care of my family. And so I got a job, believe it or not, selling tombstones. And go tell me, I didn't have a clue, how to sell tombstones. And I was working at the time. I was offered a job at the Tombstone place. I was working at a gas station. It was a service station, and it basically actually provided service, unlike gas stations today. I mean, it was the time and place where, you know, you'd be sitting outside the gas station and somebody would drive in and we'd all run up to the car and we'd check the oil and the tires, we'd fill up their gas, wash their windshield, we do all of that. They don't do that at gas stations anymore. But it was during that era in our country. But next door to our gas station, there was a Tombstone company. And it was run by a really, really old man, like my age. And he was not as, admittedly, probably not as in as good a shape as I am, but because he was like creaky and he's walking out with this hand truck, and you know, he'd sell a stone and he'd have to go get it off the yard and take it in and do sandblasting on it. And so he's taking these 500-pound stones, these really heavy stuff, and I'd see him walking out like this, and if I didn't have a car that I was waiting on, I'd say, hey, listen, his name was Gus. I said, listen, Gus, let me help you with that. Don't start. So I'd run over to him and I said, let me do this. And so he really liked me because I just was nice to him. So he sells this business to this guy, and he says, and the guy comes and they don't have a manager. And he says, well, can you recommend anybody for a manager? And he says, well, I don't know anybody. He says, you know, Jerry over there, I don't think he knows anything about monuments or granite, but he's really strong as an ox, and you might want to just ask him. And so they asked me to come and to run this company. And I said what you would probably have said, and that is, I said, I haven't got a clue how to do this. And the guy says, don't worry. He says, we're going to send you to granite school. And so they sent me to Barrie, Vermont, which is, you know, where there's a lot of granite. And I go to this granite school for 2 days. It's kind of like, you know, Granite 101. And I'm like learning granite, you know, and there are different kinds of granite, and there's different densities of granite, and there's granite that comes from Europe, and granite that comes from all over the world, and has different colors and different qualities. And I kind of learned all of that, and I understood it. So when people were coming in that, you know, were PhDs, you know, they were working in industry. I mean, they were 10 times smarter than I was. And when they're coming into my granite shop, you know, I could tell them, you know, while they were facing, you know, the decision to make a decision as it relates to this or that or the other thing, I could tell them, you know, the various qualities of each one. And so when I walked out that day, I got a diploma. I got my granite diploma. I take it everywhere I go because I want people to see it. I'm a certified granite guy. I'm your man. You want to know about granite? I can tell you all about granite. So I got a granite diploma. But the man said something to me that I never, ever, ever forgot. When he shook my hand and gave me my diploma or certificate, he says, now, Jerry, you now know 90% more about granite than anybody you will ever talk to. And you know, that helped me. Believe it or not, that really helped me. Because when these, you know, unbelievably smart people come in, you know, these very professional business people, you know, who probably have forgotten all more than I will ever know, I just went out and I would see them and I'd be intimidated by them, and then I would say, I know 90% more about granite than he knows. And so I could walk out in confidence and say this, that, and the other thing. Now let me tell you something. This is a long story to tell you what it is that you need to hear. When you leave here tomorrow, you will know 90% more about development than anybody you will ever talk to. I can just assure you of that. And all that means is, you know, be confident in this. Be confident in what it is that you're doing. Be confident, not proud or arrogant, but confident that you're doing something that basically, you know, it can be used of the Lord. It's just a tool, but it can be used of the Lord to help you accomplish what it is that God's called you to do. So you have a little bit of knowledge now, and more knowledge than you had when you left. You know, next year when we get together and I meet people in the hallway, all during the forum of people who've been in this session before, who've said, you know, Jerry, that stuff really works. And they weren't convinced when they left, but now they've seen it happen and they're beginning to understand things that they didn't know before. And in the midst of it, they've been just working like you will work when you go back, right in the trenches of what it is that needs to be done in order to move your ministry from where it is to where it is that it needs to be. So that's the devotion for this morning. So probably one of several that you've had already today. But that's, I think, I just really love that analogy of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. It's been really, really helpful to me. Okay, now, here's what we're going to do today. Let me just remind myself of what it is we're going to do today. We're going to go back to our coloring books, and I'm going to show you a model again that basically it's the one thing that I do that everybody remembers. It's amazing. You know, I was speaking to a plenary session at a stewardship conference here several years ago now, and I was kind of like the plenary speaker, and there were just like a lot of people there, and so I'm kind of doing my thing. And after the event is over, people come wandering up just to say hi. A lot of people that I've had the opportunity of working with over the years, and so as I was chatting with one of them, he looked at me and he said, "Jerry," he says, "I heard you speak 25 years ago." I said, "So really?" I says, "Do you remember a thing that I said?" And he says, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do." And he took out a sheet of paper that he'd worked on, obviously, during my presentation. He took out a sheet of paper and he handed it to me. He says, "That changed my life. When I understood that, everything changed." So I'm going to share that with you right now, and I believe you will always remember it. It just is something that you don't forget. And it's just a little diagram that I created as I was kind of thinking through it in my mind. How do I explain this in ways that people are going to understand it? Now, before I actually show it to you, and I'll give you the page to look on it, you can find it pretty quickly. But before I get into it, I want to remind you of something that I think I've already referred to earlier, but it becomes particularly relevant as we move into this discussion. And that is that there are two assumptions that we make in ministry, and most of them, in fact, both of them are wrong. And we consistently make these mistakes day after day after day after day. You do it every day. I do it every day in one form or another. We all kind of make these same mistakes. The first mistake that we make is, as we've pointed out earlier, is that everybody gets it. That when you say something that's really important about your organization, you tell people, like, this is what it is we do, and isn't this like really, really cool? You just assume that they get it, that they really do understand what it is you just told them. And you walk away oftentimes realizing that, well, I've said that, so I don't need to say that again because they got it. I told them that already, so I don't need to repeat it. Well, I always tell people, as I think I probably told you, that if you believe that, you've never had a teenager live in your house, because teenagers don't get it. I mean, you teach them, you sit and talk to them, you read books about what it is that they shouldn't do, you kind of remind them, pound them over the head with it, and then all of a sudden they do something that they know you shouldn't do. And you confront them, and they look at you with deer in the headlight lights looks and say, "Oh, Dad, that is really profound." And you say, "Well, I've only told you it about 1,700 times." Really? I mean, they just don't seem to get it. And a lot of the people that you talk to about your organization, a lot of the people that you're wanting to share what it is that you do, you kind of share it over and over again. You send it in newsletters, you send it in communications verbally that occur from platforms and churches and in community clubs and social media and all the other ways in which we try to communicate. You kind of do all that, and you just kind of assume they got it. They really do have it. They really do understand what we do, and I can assure you that most of them don't get it. But if they do get it, let's just assume that a few people do get it. The other assumption that you can't make, that we oftentimes do, that they are going to expend the energy to try to figure out how to deal with it. In other words, it's one thing to know about something, but it's an entirely different process to try to take what it is that you just told me and try to figure out its relevance to me. In other words, you just told me about a problem of orphans in Hungary. Well, I kind of get that. And that's really too bad. And that's sad. And we probably should do something about it. And you would you would nod your head and say, yeah, that's kind of like why we're here. And so you would expect that when they get in the car, let's say a husband and wife come to an event where they basically have heard, the fact that we have orphans that basically are not being cared for in our country, and they both are moved perhaps to tears in a presentation that shows videos and shows impact and outcomes and the ways that we would hope that they would remember them. And you would hope that when this man and his wife get in their car, that this conversation that I'm about to relate is taking place. Husband to wife. What a great night. I mean, that was just, really, I'm, not normally touched emotionally about something, but that was very, very emotional. And I think you, dear, and I need to do something about this. And so what I would like to do, I know a lot of people that are concerned about these kinds of things. And what I would really like to do is let's just invite some of those people over to our house, and let's invite someone from the organization to come in and just kind of talk to us about this, because this is far too important for us to ignore. And his wife says, oh yeah, you're right, sweetheart, that is absolutely true, and we could do that. And we could invite people over to our house as well, just for a meal, and kind of share that. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to just come up with a 31-day prayer guide just for you and me. Let's just think, through 31 prayer requests that we could come through, each day of the month, and we'll just put it on the refrigerator door. And you and I, why don't we just every morning when we just commit to the Lord and commit to one another, that every morning when we see that, we're just going to pray through, the needs of this incredible, wonderful organization that's doing such an incredible job in really impacting orphans. And he says, well, that is a great idea. And I've got another one. You realize there are piles of businesses that I'm associated with because I'm a pretty successful businessman, and a lot of people that were there are members of congregations of churches, and certainly churches should be involved in orphans. Isn't there a verse somewhere in James or somewhere that talks about orphans and that kind of thing, widows and that? Oh, Jesus, yes, it's the last chapter of the book of James. It's the first chapter of the book of James. It's those last verses, and he says, well, why don't we, honey, I'm going to be our ambassador for the sponsorship group for orphans in my company. And I know Bill over there at another company, I'm going to say, you need to get somebody that's going to be an ambassador for you for this particular project, because your company needs to be involved. And I'm going to help Bill, and you're to recruit 3 others, and I'm going to go recruit 2 more. And so, Bill, you need to do that, and I'm going to do that. And we're going to have ambassadors in every business in the country of Hungary. We're going to have ambassadors in every church in Hungary. We're going to just do that. Put your hands back on the wheel, dear. Oh, okay, yes, we are driving, aren't we? And so we're driving down the road, and she says, that is great. And she starts bouncing in the seat. She says, I got another idea. And we're just sharing ideas back and forth, and these are all the things we're going to do. If you believe that's going to happen, you're more insane than I am. It isn't going to happen. It isn't going to happen. And so those are huge mistakes that we make, and we consistently make them year after year after year after year, and we wonder why we're not making any progress. Now, okay, isn't that a great illustration? A great introduction. Now I have nothing else to say. Now, okay, let's go to this picture in your coloring book. I'm going to write a development coloring book. Okay, this is a great illustration, and I'm going to kind of repeat it, just kind of keep it. You're going to kind of see me develop it as it happens here. But the first thing in the diagram that I want you to see is what I call the sea of prospects. I kind of grew up around the ocean, My grandfather, as I told you earlier, was a lobsterman. And lobstermen in Maine fish close to shore in the summertime because the lobster come in from deeper waters because they shed their shells every year and they hide among the rocks. And so the lobstermen, in the summertime fish close to shore where it's not nearly as rough and dangerous. In the wintertime, the lobsters decide, well, we need to go out, out deeper. And so they'll go out about 3 or 4 miles out and they go out and fish, but out there, 5 or 6 miles out, it's much rougher. Your danger of losing your lobster traps is very, very high, and it's just kind of downright dangerous. And so a lot of lobstermen who make their money from lobstering don't go out there in the wintertime. I asked my grandfather once, I said, why don't you go out there? And he says, well, first of all, I don't like it out there. And secondly, everything I put out there, I lose. All the traps that I put in the water are now in Spain. And he says, I can't afford to have all of my lobster traps in Spain because I can't afford to go back and get them. So he says, I just don't do that. So what he would do is he would get in a trawler with a bunch of other fishermen, a large fishing boat, and they'd go out to George's Bank, which is off the coast of Massachusetts, and they would fish. And they'd be there for like a week or two. And while they're catching fish, and they're putting them in the hold of the boat, and putting them in the hold of the boat, till the boat's full, and then they bring them back. Now somehow, miraculously, my grandmother always knew when my grandfather was coming back. And I have no clue how she knew. I think I can probably guess. They didn't have radios. I mean, it was like before, fishermen had radios in their boat. But there were a lot of fishing boats from the same harbor that would go out there. And so my guess is that my grandfather or someone would yell across to somebody else and say, tell Mildred I'm going to be home on Friday afternoon. Well, whatever the case might be, Mildred would call me. My grandmother would call me, and she says, Jerry, your grandpa's coming back, and he's coming back tomorrow, Friday afternoon. So I would run down to the pier, and I'd stand there, and I'd wait, and there was a lighthouse, and I could hear the boat chugging along, coming around the lighthouse and coming into the pier, and I knew it was the boat that my grandfather was on. And they'd kind of come up next to the pier, and the next thing they would do is they'd open up this hole, and you have never seen so many fish. I mean, it is like, wow. And I can remember my grandfather telling me these stories. He says, you can't even begin to comprehend how many fish are out there. Because out there is a ship. In fact, there are 5 ships. There's one from Romania, there's one from, and they tell me from where all these ships would come from, and they were actually canning factories. And there were fishermen out catching fish. They'd take them to the mothership. They'd can them and prepare them and pack them away. And when they got full, they'd head back to Romania or wherever they came from. And another ship would come back and take its place. And it goes on day after day after day after day, year after year after year after year. And I just couldn't comprehend that. I mean, that was just beyond my ability. When I saw what it is that they had, I couldn't even begin to imagine, the magnitude in which it was being played out in a variety of other areas. Well, the point that I'm making is that in the sea of prospects is every resource you will ever need in order to be able to accomplish what it is that God's placed in your heart. I'm just here to tell you that the sea is not deficient of resources. It's not deficient of resources. God supplies what He calls us to do. He provides what it is He asks us to do. And in the sea of resources, everything that we need, everything we need is there, and it's there in abundance. All the clients that we need are in the sea of prospects. All the prayer partners that we need are in the sea of prospects. All the donors that we need are in the sea of prospects. All the volunteers that we'll need are in the sea of prospects. All the church reps that we need are in the sea of prospects. They're all there, everywhere, and they're there in abundance. I mean, you can't even begin to understand how many there are, that might come alongside and partner with you in enabling you to fulfill the vision to which God's called you. Now, in the middle of the Sea of Prospects, there's an island. And on the island, there's this beautiful house. It's got a front door. It's got a front porch. It's just a beautiful house. And that house, think of that house as you're looking at it, that is your ministry. That's your organization. That's the need for dealing with the crises that you deal with in the context of what it is that you've been called of God to do. This is the pregnancy care center. It's the orphanage. It's the whatever. It's the church. It's the small group. It's the IFES cell. I mean, this represents your organization. And the reason that you're here today is because you live in this house. You live in this house and you realize the transformation that takes place. You know, I tease Vesna, but Vesna is actually one of my favorite people on the planet because I've known Vesna now for 12 years or so. And she's still doing it. She's still hanging in there. She's still doing ministry. She's still working with young ladies experiencing a crisis pregnancy. She loves them. She shows me pictures of her children, her babies, yesterday in a book. And I'm saying, you know, this gal is incredible. She just kind of endures. And she's persistent. And I know it's not been easy. I know there's been a lot of times when I say, you know, why in the world would anybody submit themselves to this? Because this is like impossible. But despite the fact, she's still there. And why is she still there? Why are you still there in areas where you've been serving for years and years? And it's because you know what happens in here. And what it is that happens in here is worth repeating over and over and over again because there's more at stake than my comfort. What's at stake is issues relating to the kingdom of God. And so you just persist and you just persist and you endure in the face of pain, in the face of deficiency. It's kind of the rugged part in between, isn't it? There was a period of time in Sue's and my life, and it's actually been several of these periods, interestingly enough, when you have your own organization, you're kind of responsible for a lot of people, and you know, first of all, you're the last person to get paid, and if there's no money, then you don't get paid, and we've just been through that so many times that, you know, it's like, oh boy. and we just, you know, but we persist. And it's not because we're great. It's not because we just know this is what God wants us to do. And if God's going to provide for us, there's something to be learned here in the midst of this challenge. And actually, you know, and I suspect that you would probably say the same thing. And I might like to ask you, but I won't embarrass you to do that. But if you want to offer, you can certainly do that. But if you were to go to my wife, Sue, and you would say, when were some of the most intimate, growing times in our relationship, I will guarantee you she will share some of those really, really hard times. Because in those hard times, we just kind of bound together. I remember her looking at me one day, and we were in the midst of some of this, and she says, you have to understand, Jerry, that we're not the enemy. And we're, you know, God's placed us, I'm glad that I, so wonderfully blessed that I have a godly wife. She says, God's placed us in this reason for a purpose, and we're going to live it out, and we're going to be stronger as a result of it, but we're not going to give up. And I just really want to encourage you to do that because there's going to be some bad times. It's going to be difficult sometimes, and that's the trial part that brings us to a deeper understanding and produces incredible qualities in us that will last forever. So anyway, we know what happens here, and that's why we're here. But half the people in the Sea of Prospects, and probably 99% of the people in the Sea of Prospects, don't have a clue who you are. They don't know who you are. Some of them kind of think they know who you are, and they may have seen a sign somewhere and just kind of passed it and said, oh, yeah, I think I've seen a sign about this organization. So they kind of know that it's there. And there's other people that yeah, I know that's there, but I know what it is. It's an abortion clinic. And here's what? But that's their perception. Someone told them this is a place where really bad things happen, when really this is where the power of God is manifest in ways that you can't believe. But they just don't get it. They don't understand it, and they've never taken the energy to try to figure it out. And so that's the problem. And so the first thing that we must do in order to be able to reap, you know, the resources that are in the Sea of Prospects is to bring people from the Sea of Prospects and stand them right here in front of on the front porch in front of the house. Now, there's all kinds of ways you can do that. And you need to think about them. You need to think about things that you could do to bring people to the front porch. And what I mean by the front porch, I mean figuratively, you bring people to the front porch when you're standing in front of congregation and you're talking about your ministry. What you're doing is you're opening the door, you're letting them peek in. They can't get all the perspective of what's inside the house, but when you open the door, they can see something. They can see that you care for people. They can see that this is what it is that you do and this is how you do it. And you might validate that by videos and testimonies and all the kinds of things that we do to let people know this is what we do. This is what happens here. This is the nature of what it is that God's called us to do. And however you choose to say it, we can constantly do things that bring people to the front porch. We can bring them to our organization. We can go to their organization. We can do YouTube videos and put them on, social media where people can, catch a little glimpse, a little 2-minute snippet of something that goes on into our organization to give, we're kind of, taking them in and showing them a little bit of what happens in the context of our organization. But we have to have people that don't know anything about us, and we need to bring them to a point where they can be exposed to what it is that we do. And you're doing it all the time. Whenever you sit down and talk to somebody over the lunch table, over a cup of coffee, whenever you're sitting there, you can kind of open the door and say, let me just share a little bit what happened just this day or this week in the context of our ministry. Just continue to talk to people about it and let them know. And when you do that, essentially what you're doing is you're exposing them. You're opening the door and they're peeking in and they're saying, wow, this is pretty interesting. But you know what we do? As soon as the event is over, we close the door and we say, thank you for coming. God bless you. Good night. And all those people that were standing on the front porch, kind of walk back down into the sea of prospects. And development, as it's being done among most organizations in the world today, is a series of up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, continually. And it's taking place for literally years. And they're no better off developmentally 10 years from now than them, for all practical purposes, than when they started 10 years ago. So something is seriously wrong, but it's certainly an important issue. The next step in the process, which is number 2, is extending an invitation. So we're going to call this an invite. And an invite is something to which somebody has to say yes or no to. Yes or no. You see, yes and no are both rational decisions. Would you like to come in? No? Okay. See, that's a rational decision. You have forced me to make a choice. You have forced me to say yes or no. And every decision that we make, whether it be yes or no, basically begins to create the map about how we're going to relate to that particular thing to which we said yes or no to. The more we say no, the more convinced we are that this is not worthy of our consideration, and so forth. Opposite than that. And the more I say yes, the more committed I become to what it is that I said yes to. But yes or no is in response to an invitation. In my world, I use another word, and I call it bridging. And bridging simply means that between the front porch right here and the foyer inside, you'll notice that there's always a threshold, something that you have to step over to get in, right? Just a little threshold that separates the front porch from the foyer. So I call that a bridge. The bridge is getting us further down the road. One of the things that I've tried to emphasize over and over again in the context of our time together is the fact that relationships are a journey. They're not a destination. They're a journey. We're constantly moving forward in a relationship. And the moment they stop, they stagnate. And so we're constantly moving forward. And a bridge, along the way, there are bridges. There are things that move us to another level and so forth and so on. And I'm going to make a statement now, and I'm going to validate it later, but I don't think I need to validate it. But the greatest mistake we make in development is the failure to bridge. It's the failure to bridge. I mean, we bring people to the front porch and we say, hey, thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Take home a brochure or two and, God bless you and good night, and nothing ever happens, despite the fact that it might have been the greatest production ever, in terms of your presentation and delivery of the message and the uniqueness of your organization. But they walk away and they never get involved, and our conclusion is they don't care. And that's not even fair. That's not fair to say they don't care because they don't do something. It's wrong that you didn't provide them the opportunity to do something. And that's what the bridges provide. Now, just hold the thought for a moment, because I'm going to give you some examples of bridges. And when I think you see the examples, it's all going to come together for you. The next, and it's not a step, but the next movement here, number 3, is what I call conversion. And conversion is a percentage. Okay, so it's a percentage here. And basically what you're measuring, let's say I go to a church or I go to a service club. A lot of organizations have service clubs that do things where people in the community come together and they do things for the community, so they have a club to do that. We have what we call Rotary Club in America. You may have some of those in your communities or whatever. But let's say that I come to the Rotary Club and there are 100 people that are members that hear me speak. Okay, so there's 100 people there and I'm talking about our organization and so forth and so on. And then at the end of the session, I extend some bridges, and 50% of the people that were there, or 50, said yes to my invitation to come in. Then in that particular example, I had a 50% conversion rate, okay? A 50% conversion rate. 50% of the people that were there responded or said yes to an opportunity that I provided them. Okay, now just kind of hold all those thoughts, and let me help you bring it together. Sue, and you've heard me talk so much about Sue because I just love her so much, but she's quite an incredible lady. And one of the things that she's accused me of, over the years, she says, you know what your problem is, Jerry? Now, she's got a PhD in psychology, so she has a right to, be able to at least analyze what my problem is. And she says, you know what your problem is? And I said, what's my problem, honey? And she says, you just live in your own world. I says, yeah. She says, honey, it's just a great world. You got to come in sometime. I mean, this is like the best world ever. I mean, this is Jerry's world. And my kids, as they were growing up, they called it Dad's world. And they'd bring their friends over to our house and they say, don't pay any attention to my dad. He just kind of like lives in his own world. And he'll oftentimes be gone when he's really there. And that's Sue's biggest complaint, Jerry, come out of your world just a second. I need to talk to you about something in my world. And so we have this little conversation going on. But let me tell you something about Jerry's world. In Jerry's world, Jerry has never, ever, 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 ever expected anybody to say no to him. I've just never expected anybody to say no to me. And you're sitting there saying, well, have anybody ever said no to you? And I said, oh yeah, lots of people have said no to me. Now you'd think, given my fears and my sense of fear of rejection or whatever that I talked to you about yesterday, you'd think that would bother me. But if you were to say, well, how do you deal with that then, big guy? And I would say, well, I just didn't give them enough opportunities to say yes. Because who would want to say no to Jerry? But the point is really, it's a silly example. But that's a point that I really want you to hang on to for just a moment. Now, I'm going to do a little role playing here, okay? You're all Rotarians right now. Now, a Rotarian, just in case you don't know what you are, you're a member of my club, my Rotarian club, and we are a community service club. What we exist to do is to provide services to our community. And I just spoke, or I'm speaking at your club right now. And so I have just come, I've talked a little bit about maybe 15 minutes about, my organization, I talked a little, not too much. I've kind of included a couple of quote unquote testimonies of some of our clients. And we showed a little 3-minute or a 5-minute video, to basically conclude my presentation, and that just turned off, and now I'm getting up from my seat to give the conclusion. Okay? Hey, thanks so much for being here at the Rotary Club today. It's really great to have you here. And it was wonderful, and I really appreciate the fact that you have the passion here as a group to really do things in the community to make a difference. And you've heard a little bit about what it is we're doing, and I can just assure you that my organization is making a difference. And we are impacting the lives of a lot of people in our community that are facing some very, very unique challenges. And you've seen the result of some of that. You've seen some of the process in the video. You've heard some of the stories of people that have been working with us and whose lives have been impacted as a result of our involvement. And many of you, I know, on the basis of the expressions of your face as I was watching you as these stories were being told, I know many of you were really touched by it. But I would like to share with you, when I came in this morning, I provided a brochure, and I'd like you to pick up that brochure right now. It's in front of you and the table. It's a little trifold brochure. And it tells a little bit about our organization. I want you to take a look at that. And then on the back of it, it has a little section that's perforated. And I'd like you to tear off that if you would for a moment. Just kind of tear it off. And I want to share with you 5 or 6 ways that you could be involved in our organization. I know oftentimes when I speak around the city about this, and people just get so moved by what it is that we do. And many of them will say, well, how can I be involved? Or can I be involved, or is there a place for me to be involved in an organization like this? And let me just tell you, there is. And we would love to have you engaged with us as partners in helping us to move forward this incredible mission to which we've committed ourselves. So if you'll just kind of take a look at that, just flip it over on the last. I've got about 7 things, and there's a little bulleted items that have a little box in them. But the first one that I'd like to just share with you is that, if you are impressed about what it is we're doing, and you're saying this is really a need that needs to be addressed in the context of our community, then to us, you are a very, very important person. And as a leader in this community, as a member of this club, you're just a VIP. And so we have what we call a VIP newsletter. And now don't get scared about that, because it only comes once a month. And it's very, very short. It usually has some pictures and diagrams and so forth. But it just kind of keeps you updated on what it is that's happening in our area of the world where we're providing a service. And so it's going to be pictures, it's going to be diagrams, charts, and a little bit of narrative. It's something that you can look at and be done looking at it in about 40 seconds, because we've timed our people to basically look at it, to analyze it, and then tell us what it was like, and we time them. So it's not going to take a long time for you to do that. And we'll only send it once a month. We promise you we'll not send it any more than that, nor will we give your email address to anybody. But if you would like to be a part and be able to be knowledgeable of what it is we're doing so that you can discuss it with other people who may have questions, then we would like you to be one of our VIP newsletter recipients. So all you need to do is just check the box, and you can put in your email address, and we'll make sure you get that. And I promise you we're not going to abuse you in any way. A second thing that you might want to do is we do have a printed newsletter. If you'd like to get that, again, it's free. It comes out quarterly. And what's really powerful about this newsletter, and we've given you a copy as you leave of our last month's issue, or our last quarter's issue. But it anecdotally tells the stories of people who've been impacted by what it is we do. And stories are great. You can tell me, I can tell you facts, but when you see the stories, as you've heard the stories from some of these people that were with us today, it just becomes so impactful and such a wonderful reminder of the fact that difference is occurring in our city in the areas where we provide our services. So if you'd like to receive our free newsletter, just check out that, and we'll make sure that you get it. As a third thing, we think more people in the community need to know what we're doing, and so what we're having is we have what we call an ambassador program. And let me just tell you what the ambassador program is, just real briefly. We're looking for a representative in every church in the city, and we're looking for a representative in every business in the city who basically will have brochures available and be available to communicate with people in the church and or in the business, any questions that they might have as it relates to things that we may be doing. We want them to know that this service is available, that it's provided for you, and if you want to use it, great. If you don't, we understand, but the realities are they need to know about it. And so we have these brochures, and if you'd like to be an ambassador, it's a kind of an informal relationship, but we'll make sure you get materials that you can distribute to people as it may be needed in the workplace or in the church where you worship. A fourth thing that we do is we have a corporate partnership program. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our corporate partnership program. We want every business in the community to be a part of what it is we're doing. And so every year we have a special thrust, and it's going to be coming up actually in November, so it's just got a few months to, but in November we just approach all of the businesses, and large and small, corporations, big and little tiny mom and pops, and we just go to them and we say, we want you to be a part of our corporate partnership or our business partnership program. And basically all we're asking them for is $25 a year. So it's not like a really big commitment. And what we do right before, just at December 1st, every December 1st, we buy a full page ad in the local newspaper, and we just list all of our corporate partners in alphabetical order, thanking them for their participation in what it is that, and enabling us to do what it is that we do. We want to give you recognition for what it is that you've committed yourself to do, and it's just a wonderful way to be able to say thank you, and a wonderful way in which you can be involved in a meaningful way in what it is we're doing. And we also, and I could go through and give about 4 more, but you notice what I've done is I have given at least one thing or more. The problem with offering one alternative is you have a 50-50 chance that people are going to reject you. I want them to be involved, and I don't care what it takes to get them into the front door, because once I get them into the front door, then I can begin building a relationship with them. But I can't do it from the front porch, between the foyer and the front porch. We need to get them into the front door. So a bridge is designed to move people from the front porch into the foyer. Now there's a couple of things that you need to remember. One is, whenever you present bridges, present a multiplicity of bridges. In other words, more than one. I would recommend at least 6, and you can think of your own. I mean, and literally, the longer you do this, the more you will discover that bridging is an art. It really is an art. And you want to bridge, hear me, you want to bridge everything. Everything. You're going out to lunch with somebody and talking about your organization, you want to provide some bridges. Bridges keep the momentum going. It doesn't stop the relationship, it only grows the relationship. So you're constantly wanting to move people forward on this continuum of understanding in terms of who it is we are and what it is that we do. So you constantly need to bridge. Whenever you make a presentation, whenever you preach a sermon, whenever you write an article, whenever you talk to people, you're constantly bridging, moving them down the road closer to the destination of what it is that we've committed ourselves to do as an organization. So you're constantly bridging. You never stop bridging. You're always bridging. Now, so you want to have a multiplicity of bridges, and you want to keep the threshold low. In other words, if I came to the same meeting and said, you're a bunch of business guys, and we probably, you don't know about what it is we're doing, but we're asking you all to make a commitment of $10,000 to support our organization this year. I mean, what do you think the conversion rate's going to be on that? I mean, it's going to probably be 0, because what you've done is you've created a threshold that you need a pole vault to get over. You want them not to trip coming in. You want them to come in, and you want them to be a part of the family. Essentially, what we're doing is we're asking people to partner. What do we need more than donors? Partners. We want people to partner with us. And think of creative ways in which people could partner. The more people that are quote unquote involved in your organization, the stronger your organization will be. For remember, the middle name of cultivation is involvement. A-I-D. And as people become involved, they take ownership. And as they take ownership, they participate. And as they participate, they become even more committed partners. And then somewhere along the line, they're going to make some sacrifices on your part, because partners always donate. They always contribute more than what you would ever expect for them to do. And as a result of that, your ministry will grow. So, in response to the 2 assumptions that we make in ministry, both of which are wrong, one is they don't get it. Well, many of them won't. And the other one is that they're not going to expend the energy to try to figure out how to deal with it. Essentially, what you're doing is you're expending the energy on their behalf to do what it is that you know is going to be productive in moving your ministry forward. So you're expending the energy, not them, because they will not do it. I'm just here to tell you that they are not going to expend the energy to try to figure out how to help you. They just are not going to do it. It's not going to happen. And this tool really has helped an awful lot of people because it kind of puts it together. Needs, potential, introduction, engagement. And you may have me call you, or you may call me someday on the phone. I hope that you will. I'm going to give you all my phone number and email address and address. So if you're in the U.S., you're going to all come see me, and that'd be great. Sue and I would love to have you and host you into our home and just love on you and introduce you to some of our friends and so forth. So we just really want you to come be a part of this. I have said this to every class I have ever taught at the European Leadership Forum, and many people have come. And you know something? We are absolutely elated. So please, I want to be a part of your life. And you may say, well, I really don't want you to be a part of my life, Jerry. Thank you very much. But we really would like to be a part of your life. But we have shared this with people, and many people have been really impacted by it. But I had a lady come to a seminar just like this a number of years ago, and I told the people that I'm going to tell you the way this is going to change your life, because it kind of will. You're always going to be looking for it now. You will always look for the bridge. And you're going to hear a pastor preach a sermon, and you're going to keep, okay, where's the bridge? Need the bridge. I mean, don't just talk to me about holiness. Talk to me about the relevance of holiness to my life now. I need to know that now. That's the bridge, and you missed the bridge. And you're going to be looking for it, and it's going to start frustrating you because they didn't bridge. Oh. Well, anyway, this lady goes to church one Sunday morning. She left on Friday. This is Sunday morning. All right, 2 days later. She leaves our seminar Sunday morning. She's with her husband and her family, and she's going to church. She's sitting in the front row of the church, and there's a missionary there, someone like you, and really, really passionate about what it is that they do. And they give this incredible, just this unbelievable message on serving God and trusting God and being engaged in God's work and telling them about their field and their opportunities and the things that God is doing. And she's just like so excited about this. And after the meeting is over, the pastor says, we so are grateful for this person coming to our church today. Thank you for coming, brother. Thank you for coming, sister. It's been absolutely marvelous. Now, everyone, let's have a word of prayer and be dismissed. And so they have a word of prayer and dismiss. And she gets in the car. Now, she's in the car with her husband. And she's really, I'm talking seriously agitated. And her husband says, well, what's wrong, honey? She says, you will never believe this. I am ready. I am prepared to give my firstborn son to help this guy. Can you believe what it is he's doing? And he never bridged. And her husband never heard the word bridge before. He can't totally understand why his wife is so agitated. And she goes on and on and on and on as to make a point to her husband who's just not getting it. And so finally, her husband hands him his cell phone and says, call Jerry, he cares. So she call me on the phone. She says, Jerry, you won't believe it happened today. And she's kind of going on and on and on and on. But you'll be looking for it, I can promise you that. You'll be looking for it because it just doesn't happen. And I think most of you say it doesn't happen much in our organization. But shame on you if it doesn't happen after you leave here, because I'm going to make life miserable for all of you. So, and if you call me and say, we had this great meeting. Oh, Jerry, if I get this call from Vesna, I would absolutely come to Serbia just to bawl her out. But if she calls me and says, Jerry, we had 300 people at a banquet. It was just absolutely so wonderful. And it was, God really used it. It's like the Spirit of God came down. And I look at it and say, hey, Vesna, that's just really great. I says, what was your conversion rate? Conversion. I know it's a word that's somewhere. Let me get my notes out, Jerry. Conversion. Oh, you mean that's the percentage of the people that were there that responded to my bridge? Yeah, that's it. Oh. We just didn't do that. Lost opportunity. Believe me, lost opportunity, lost opportunity, lost opportunity. We're going to talk about strategic planning, and I have a model of strategic planning that I really like, and I'm going to share with you the model. But before I talk about the model, I want you to turn in your coloring books again. Excuse me for coloring these coloring books. I just think that's a cute name, actually. Okay. This here, okay? This is I call this the attitude continuum. And so that's what it looks like. And what I was trying to communicate with this, and you'll see the relevance because it is definitely relevant to strategic planning. But in every relationship that we're a part of, so let's think of the relationships that we're a part of. Some of us are married, so we have a marital relationship. Most of you are members of a church, so you have a church relationship. Many of you are working with an organization, perhaps other than the organization that you're here representing. I know some of you have secular jobs, and so you're working on a job place. And so you have relationships. You know, that's another relationship that you have in life. You may be in a service club. You may be in a small group in your church. You may be, in a variety of different relationships, and we're all in a variety of different relationships. And in every one of those relationships that I just mentioned, we are somewhere on a continuum, somewhere between being cynical about that organization and what it is that it does, or euphoric. Now, those are about the only two words that I could think that were extreme. Cynical is the guy that's kind of, and the gal, that basically just is critical of everything that you do, basically has had, probably a whole bunch of bad experiences, and so he or she is more than willing to share them with anybody. And that's unfortunate, of course, because the average dissatisfied customer shares their dissatisfaction with about 15 people, when the average satisfied customer shares it with about 5. And so if you have enough unhappy people that are disgruntled and upset about you, then the realities are there is a tipping point where that really does become a significant impact in your ability to be able to effectively do ministry. So there are some cynical people out there in the world, and then there are some people that are just like euphoric. Whenever they hear about you, they smile, they want to jump up and down and say, this is the greatest organization in the world. They're just kind of bubbly about it. They can't talk enough about it. And so those are two extremes. And I think most of us would agree that, there are very few people that perhaps are, cynical, probably more cynical than euphoric, but it represents a rather small percentage perhaps of the total number of people that basically represent our supporting network. Now, right here in the middle is a person that's just coming into an organization. Now, they may be coming into the organization as a potential. They're coming into your church because they think that this is a great church, and perhaps I can find in this church what it is that I'm looking for that's going to meet my needs, whatever those needs might be. It's going into a new job, and this is the first time that the first day on the job, and so you're just kind of coming in. You don't know too much about the people who work there. You don't know, whether they're good people or bad people. But you have a real optimistic outlook in terms of the business and what it does and represents, and so you come in with certain levels of expectations. But you're coming into that relationship. You join a club. You join a small group that may be a part of your church. I mean, there's all kinds of these relationships that are out there. You choose to marry this person. And so you're entering into a relationship. And all of us enter into relationships with expectations that are based upon the needs that we perceive that we want this particular relationship to help us address. Okay? So we all come in with expectations. And almost always our expectations are unrealistic. Usually people coming in have expectations, and they're not always realistic. In fact, often they're not realistic at all. And so consequently, we set ourselves up many times for failure only because we don't share with people expectations. I mean, in other words, if you don't share with people what they are to expect from this relationship, then they're going to project out what it is that they expect to receive from this relationship. And so, the first key is when people come to your organization, probably the best thing you could do is just sit down with them. What are your expectations? What are you looking for as you come into here? Because we'd love to have those expectations met. Let me tell you how it typically works in our organization. You're going to come here, and the first thing that's going to happen to you, you're going to get overwhelmed because there's just an awful lot that we do that you might not understand. And so it's really important that you understand that we're not sometimes, because of how much we have to do and the limited resources that we have, that we do the best that we can, but sometimes it can get a little hairy around here, and you just need to understand that. Well, if you just say that to someone, when it happens, they're not surprised. Or if you're coming into a church and thinking that somebody's going to recognize you for all the gifts that you have, spiritual gifts that you have, and are going to immediately put you into leadership because you obviously are very, very good at what it is that you do and you should be placed into leadership, at least that's your perspective, then the realities are you're probably going to be disappointed, because it's probably not going to happen that way. And so the pastor or someone in the church membership committee or someone comes to you and says, let me tell you what happens here, because we want you to be comfortable. We want you to sit down for the first month or 6 weeks that you're here and just absorb what it is that God's doing and allow us the opportunity to get to know you so that we can work together, perhaps to find places and areas of our church that you might be able to participate. Well, if I'm expecting that I'm going to be picked next week for a leadership position that's going to, be, significant, then I'm probably going to be disappointed. So the best way to deal with unrealized expectations is to create expectations. But we oftentimes don't do that. So we're almost starting at a negative step from the beginning, because now we've got people that at least initially will be prone to move over here, and not just because of you, but because everything in most people's minds is kind of wants to go here, but they're very, very slow to move over here, because many of them have had bad experiences. And this is just one of another bad experience that they don't want to have. And so people generally are cautious to get too enthusiastic too soon in relationships, that they hope will be meaningful. So I'm going to call this south, okay? We're going to have south and we're going to have north. So I'll refer about people going south and people going north so you know what I'm talking about. Now, there are 3 steps that are outlined in there in the sheet that you have in front of you that lead to cynicism. And they're very, very logical, and most of you would look at them and say, yeah, that makes sense. They come in initially with expectations, hoping that things are going to be different than they've ever experienced before. And when they don't happen the way they anticipate they're going to happen, then they become discouraged. Well, I just thought they had their act a little bit better together than this. I was hoping that I would have a leadership position, and I haven't even been acknowledged for the fact that I have gifts that basically could be used in the context of this ministry. I had hoped that this group that I'm a part of, this small group in my church, was going to be my church where I could, engage with them, they could engage with us, and we could, happily join together in living life together. And it hasn't happened that way. And so they get discouraged. Now, the next step is frustration. And frustration is a person who's discouraged who knows why, or who at least thinks he knows why, that if you were to do something differently, they wouldn't be discouraged. And so they get frustrated. A frustrated person is kind of like tense. Really, you can almost see it in them. And they talk about their why they're discouraged. And they said, well, if they would only do this, then I would never be discouraged. And they're just almost shaking, when they're saying it, because they're extremely frustrated because they think they know the answer. Now, they may have some good insight, but they may not have the answer. Now, the next step, if you don't deal with this, then eventually they become apathetic. They kind of develop the attitude, well, if they don't care, why should I? Like, nobody seems to care around here, so I'm just going to join the crowd. And so you just kind of go out there and you're just not engaged at all. And then, if you let apathy exist for a long time and not deal with it, then people become cynical. And usually during this period of time, a lot of people just leave and go start over again someplace else. And in churches, that's almost always true, unless you're Lutheran. See, Lutherans never leave, you know. I mean, and I'm being facetious, and I always pick on Lutherans, but sometimes I'll pick on other people. I mean, it could be Baptists, it could be anybody, and I'm not picking on anyone because I have an adversarial relationship with them, so don't misunderstand me. But a lot of my Lutheran friends, I mean, we've been Lutheran, you know, for all of our lives. My grandfather was a Lutheran, my great-grandfather was a Lutheran, my great-great-grandfather was a Lutheran. In fact, you know, we're kind of related to Martha or Martin and whatever her name was. And I really do know her name, but I just can't remember it right now. But you know, we kind of related to them, and so, you know, this has been our church ever since we were baptized in this church, we were born in this church, we're going to live in this church, we're going to die in this church. And so what happens is you'll notice that they're kind of gravitating constantly towards the back row. And usually the back row is filled with the cynics, you know, who basically are going to evaluate and assess everything that you're going to do and remind you that it's never going to work, so why would you bother to try? And so, and you know that. So, now the unfortunate thing is that these people you have to live with. In other words, they're not going to go away. It's not like you can say, well, I'm going to erase my database because I don't really like these people on my database because they're all cynical and I'm just going to... Well, I mean, if you could erase it, you'd reproduce the same thing eventually. But the realities are the only way you can move people from here this way is through success. In other words, you need to set goals, you need to set objectives, and you need to let people know where you're going. That's what a strategic plan is. You need to let them know where you're going, and then when it happens, you need to celebrate it. And you need to remind people that this is something that we said we were going to do, and it's been done, and we're going to celebrate what it is that's happened so that we can continue to move on. And so the only way you're going to be able to do this is to basically move them forward by strategically reminding people periodically that these things are happening in accordance to the mission and in light of the mission that we've committed ourselves and the vision to which we're striving for, and just kind of remind people, because people don't see it, and if they don't see it, they're not going to respond to it, and if they don't respond to it, you're basically putting yourself at risk. Now, there are 3 steps that lead to euphoria. And one is encouragement. That's the first one. People get encouraged, they get excited. You walk in, you say, this is a different kind of place. People have different kinds of attitudes. They seem to be very sensitive to one another. They're working very precisely and in an orderly way to move people down a continuum so that they can fulfill their potential. And so they get encouraged. And then they get hopeful that maybe this is, you know, where it is that I can find myself. This is, maybe I found the place. And again, they're very tentative because most of us have been hurt over here. We have bad experiences to share with people, and I'm sure if I asked you all, you could all share a bad experience that wants to prevent you from moving over here. Then you get enthusiastic. Well, I'm just really enthusiastic about this. And then you get euphoric, you're kind of bubbling all over, and you can't stop talking about an organization. And there are people that are that way. I mean, I've met people that way, and some of you are that way as it relates to the organization of which you're a part. Now, I think sin and hurt combined, you know, kind of automatically move us in this direction. And that's just natural, and that's not something we're going to get over. I think there's a propensity for us to move south just because we don't want to get hurt. We're safe there, and we're not going to be disappointed, so if we don't have any expectations, we're never disappointed. And so that, you know, that's a problem. But the realities are, you know, this is really relevant to the discussion on strategic planning. And it's really relevant on this discussion of strategic planning because where anyone is, and listen carefully to the statement, where anyone is on the attitude continuum, wherever they are, wherever the dot is, where anyone is on the attitude continuum is predicated on their perception of your ability to do what it is you say you're going to do. Okay? Now let me repeat that. And don't forget, this is like a really, really important statement. Where anyone is on the attitude continuum, where you may find yourself here, you may find yourself here in some relationships, you may find yourself here, but wherever you are on the attitude continuum, where you ended up was basically based upon your perception of the ability of the organization or the person to do what it is that you were expecting them to do. So if you went into marriage thinking that, everything was going to be happily ever after, life was going to be just perfect always, you'd never have an argument. No, we'll never have an argument. We just love each other so much. He comes in on the white horse, you jump on, you kind of go off into the sunset, and everything's perfect. Well, you're going to be disappointed because it's not going to happen that way. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, it's absolutely essential to grow, and to become deeper and deeper in relationship. That's going to happen as a result of trials. And to try to communicate. I know in Christian circles we do that, and I think there's songs that talk about it. I probably could think of some of the words of them, I've just never been happy again, and all the wonderful things that we basically talk about our relationship with God. And I think happiness, if you're looking at it being always euphoric, then you're going to be set up for some disappointments because it's not that way. And we all know that. And if we could just tell people, and even our children, this trials thing that's between knowledge and understanding. This is a process you need to understand, sweetheart, as you're talking to your daughter. And this is what it is that's going to go through, and it's going to be hurtful, and it's going to be hard. But let me show you, let me give you the tools that you need in order to be able to deal with it. Then all of a sudden, it's not unexpected, it's not a surprise, and we know that it's a part of life. So keep that in the back of your mind, that this really does impact the planning process. Because what do when we create strategic plans? We're telling people what we're going to do. And if we don't produce, then we put ourselves in harm's way. In other words, I have been in organizations that I periodically get invited to facilitate strategic planning initiatives. And I've talked to people within the organization, and some of them are really reluctant about going into the relationship of, let's do a strategic plan, because they'll say, well, we did that 2 years ago. So we have versions. Let's see, version 2001. That was a pretty funny one, actually. 2003, a little bit more realistic, but it never happened. 2007, well, that was a mess. And they're looking at strategic plans, almost, we're going to do it again, and we're expecting the same results because it never changes anything. And so is there any reason why people would be cynical? They all start into the process. Most of the groups that I work with, when I start talking about strategic plan, they all start at cynical because we've done it before, and it never really works out for us. I'm going to give you, and like I said, this is a little bit of a different attack on this topic, which I think is extremely important. And a lot of it is based upon how things have changed in the economy, how things have changed in this new world of philanthropy that I talked about, this 21st century philanthropy. And part of it is the new emphasis, which has always been an emphasis, but it's an even greater emphasis now on outcomes versus outputs. Typically we have looked at strategic planning as being, improving our outputs so that they're more attractive to donors who might want to invest in us. And so what I mean by outputs are the things that we're doing, like Vesna may say that, we met with 1,300 girls last year that were facing a crisis pregnancy. That 1,300, 800 made a choice for life. And so, those are statistics that are meaningful. We had, this, that, and the other thing happened. And those are all outputs. In other words, all we're saying is this is what we did last year. We had at IFES and Slovenia, these are the things that happened last year. We began to talk about it that way. All right, those are outputs. But something, nobody in the charitable world right now is all that concerned about outputs. They want to know about them, and obviously if they're inadequate, they're going to, obviously raise their eyebrows and so forth. But what they're really, really concerned about is outcomes. In other words, what does a person look like 10 years from after they left you, in terms of how they are responding, essentially, to the mission to which you've committed to as an organization. Because the purpose of I mean, saving a baby is one thing. But 10 years later, being a mom who's happily married and living in a relationship, with a man and growing their family in responsible ways, that's an outcome that basically should be the ultimate goal of what it is you've committed yourself. And I know that's the case. So people are concerned about those outcomes more than they are the outputs, because if you're not producing that, which is a reasonable expectation, if you extrapolate from your mission statement what it is that you really are committed to doing, basically it ought to be reflected, in some very, very observable, tangible ways in the future. And so outcomes are like really, really important. And so I've become completely aware of this, and it's changed a lot of the focus that I'm taking now on strategic planning, and when we do it with organizations. And so I'm going to walk you through the process. And as I'm walking you through the process, I want to remind you of something. That the difference between good and great in an organization costs nothing.
No money.
Yeah, no money. It costs something, but no money. It's free. And we have got to get that mentality clear in our minds, because, as nonprofit organizations or organizations that receive money from other people, we kind of feel like we could kind of go out and do as much as we could get people to support financially. And so we just, we do things, and basically we make decisions about what we do based upon whether or not we have a constituency that would respond to it. And so we're kind of, building, an organization around, something that we know that is going to be appealing to our constituents. And so, we continue to do that, and we continue to do that. And essentially it's resulted in some very, very disappointing outcomes. I think, and I was involved in this, so I'm speaking to myself, but, back after the walls fell down and we could come back into areas of the world that basically had been closed to us as Christians to come in and boldly proclaim the message of the gospel, there was a strong evangelistic effort that many of you are clearly aware of and perhaps participated in your countries. In America, it was called the Co-Mission. It was just a group of, organizations, wonderful organizations. The Campus Crusade for Christ was a part of that. Focus on the Family was a part of that. The Association of Christian Schools International was a part of that. Walk Through the Bible. Those were all, those were the primary founders of the original movement. And I was involved in it from the very, very beginning, before it was even called the Co-Mission. I went to the very first meeting where it was, we got together in Whittier, California, and we began to talk about this vision when it was just emerging as an opportunity. And we went out, in droves and hordes, and we went out and we basically, had the Jesus film and a lot of other great things that emerged out of that whole initiative, and it had some pretty significant results. I continue to talk to people because of my involvement with the Jesus film and raising a lot of resources to make that possible for people to have it in their own countries. And I continue to hear from people that say, that's where I came to know Christ. That's what made the difference in my life, and so forth. So I know it made a difference. But the other thing that we brought with us was our culture. And in our culture, we have mega churches in America. I go to a mega church, like 5,000 people show up on Sunday morning. That's really a big church. And we showed pictures of our churches. And we let people think, you could do this in your country. And realizing that this, $50 million building, we could build it in Kyiv. And we can build it in every other place. And some of those churches were built, and they were built on American dollars from people who basically are very, very fickle. You know what fickle is? That's love them today and not even know that they existed tomorrow. That's kind of an American thing. And I'm not proud of it. But basically, we were passionate about it until the next crisis came along. And we gave enough money for some of those buildings to get started, and then we left them, and they were left empty. And we tried to transpose our culture on your culture, which was wrong. And so consequently, in many respects, we did more damage to the cause of Christ in the body of Christ, and not more damage, but certainly we did damage, that basically is still being felt. I mean, there are people in countries where I have served, that are representing ministries, and they get not one single dollar from the community because the community's attitude towards that organization is, why would you bother with us? Just go over to America. They'll give you the money. And so consequently, we have no partners because we never had the need for partners because they were all over there. And now they're all gone, and we find ourselves holding the bag. And I'm concerned about that. I mean, I've spent a lot of time confessing to the Lord, the sin that I think was committed there. And I don't think the sin was committed that we came and we shared the gospel of Christ. But I think in trying to convince people that basically the way we need to be doing life is the way we do it and not the way that it's being done here. And so for that, I apologize for everybody. But do you understand what I'm saying? And maybe you're saying, well, that never happened in our country. But my guess is that you probably are all, some of you were nodding all the time that I was talking about that because you can give me real live examples of how it was happening, where you live. Now, so we're talking a little bit about outcomes. And now I'm going to give you the model. There's 8 steps in the model. It's kind of really easy. And actually, it's a simple thing. It's not like horribly profound, and you could probably guess why, because I'm not horribly profound. But it works, and it works exceptionally well. So here's the 8 steps, and then we'll go back to how it plays out practically within an organization like yours. The first step in this planning process is what I call profile. And profile is a picture of the ideal. A picture of the ideal. Now, it occurs at a variety of different levels. Planning is kind of a layered thing. You're layering, you're first of all talking about the big picture, and then you kind of keep going down to plan the components that are going to make the big picture become reality. And so what I'm doing now, which I never did before to the extent that we're doing it now in our practice, is when we talk about profiles, the picture of the ideal, what we're asking people to do is to imagine the year is 2024. It's 10 years from now. I just kind of rolled in with my walker and the oxygen. I hope that's not the case. But here we are, we're back here in 2024, and the exercise that we're doing now is basically back in 2014 when we were all together, here in Viswa. Jerry asked us to make a picture of the ideal of what we want a client of ours to look like 10 years from now. In other words, he forced us into thinking not about what we're looking for tomorrow, but what it is that we ultimately want to see realized, in the lives of the people that we serve. What should they look like 10 years from now? Because they should look like something different if we've poured our energies and our money and our resources into plowing into their lives. What would they look like? And when I talk about what would they look like, what would they know? How would they be living? How would they be relating to the church? How would they be relating, to their people in their community? How would they be relating to their employer and so forth? I mean, they should be different, don't you think? If we've been successful in fulfilling the vision and the mission that we've committed ourselves to, what would they look like? We just did this exercise in a Christian school in California. And in fact, I was going to do strategic planning the ways that I've always done it, and they kind of said, we don't want to do it the way you always did it. Because what we really want to talk about, because I had given them a little lecture on outcomes and outputs prior to the introduction of the whole process, they said, we just want to talk about outcomes. Because that's where we're failing. Do you realize that, and I've told you a little bit about this, and so and I've talked so much at this conference. I mean, this is like by the time it's all over, it's like almost 30 hours just of lectures, and then there's everything else. So I honestly don't remember what I've said here. So if I repeat myself, you're going to be very patient with me. But in studies that have been done, in analyzing various aspects of Christian ministry, what's been discovered, because it's being done now on a regular basis, is that the results oftentimes of Christian organizations that are doing something and secular organizations that are doing the same thing, that the impact is not that different. In fact, it's almost minusculely low, like under 2%. In other words, if you have a 2% success rate in accomplishing what it is that you're doing, and you're an investor determining whether or not you're going to invest in this organization, what are you going to do? I don't think so. Why would I invest thousands of dollars to help you to have mediocre results? That doesn't make any sense. And so, and it's going to continue to happen only because there's going to be less and less and less money available. And so now, people, who have money and who are willing to give it, and there still will be an awful lot of people that will do that. So I'm not suggesting that they're going to go away, but they're going to be much more discretionary. And the reason they're going to be discretionary is because I want this dollar to be worth $10 in impact, in the outcomes that you're doing. And if it's happening, believe me, I'm going to happen because you will be assured of success developmentally if you can consistently produce consistent outcomes. And I was telling someone the other day, and if I said this to you, you again, forgive me, but there are 4 universities in America that have above average outcomes. In fact, about 98% of their graduates look exactly like they want them to look like. Isn't that amazing? 4 universities, and 3 primary ones, that 98% of their graduates look like they intend for them to look after they go through the process. And those universities are the United States Air Force Academy, the United States Military Academy, and the United States Naval Academy. They all look the same. And what's really interesting is Sue and I lived in Colorado Springs, which happens to be the home of the United States Air Force Academy. And they have 4,000 students, and there's 1,000 in each class, and they have and one of their practices is they have sponsors. Every cadet who comes to the Air Force Academy has a sponsor who's a member of the community. And you have to kind of apply for that because they just don't pick anyone, but they allowed Sue and I to do that. And so we had 9. We lived in Colorado Springs for 12 years. We had 9 cadets that we supported. And I want you to know, it was the most interesting experience I've ever had in my life. First of all, there are 1,000 slots and about 30,000 applications for people who want to come in. So, basically they're picking who they want, which is really pretty interesting. And what they want, are people who have certain skills, and they're looking for certain things, and I understand that, and that's one of the reasons why they're so successful. But what's really interesting is that these guys, when they'd show up, because they'd always show up the day before they were supposed to go and, log in or whatever, and their parents, we'd invite their parents to come with them, so they'd all stay in our house. And these guys were really, and there were some girls that were a part of that, they really weren't very attractive. I don't mean that they weren't good looking. I'm saying they just were kind of obnoxious. They knew they were smart. They knew were the kind of the cream of the crop. They were arrogant. They were just really not pleasant to be with. Honestly, it was really not something that we really enjoyed. We tried to be, really loving to them, and we obviously were, I'm sure. But the realities are they were just a bunch of arrogant, nasty kids. They weren't nasty. Okay. So, but it's interesting. About 8 weeks later, they were some of the most humble, contrite, polite. That's just in 8 weeks. And 4 years later, they're some of the most incredible young men and young women I have ever known. How could you take a 22-year-old, put him in a multi-million-dollar jet and say, go for it, guy? They're going to train them, obviously, but to have absolute confidence, that everything's going to be okay.
one of our friends, it's a family friend, I talked him into going to the Air Force Academy, which he really didn't want to do, and he did it. And he's about 28 years old right now, and there was a period of time when he was like 26 where he was in control. He was the man in charge of coordinating 28 satellites, 25 GPS satellites, 25,000 miles above the Earth. That was his job. And he was like the main man, 25 years old. And I says, well, you think you'll ever leave the Air Force? And he says, well, all of my high school pals, they're working at Pizza Hut. He says, I've got this exciting job, and I can do just about anything that I want to do, and he says, no, I think I'll just stay where I'm at because, people aspire to go to the Air Force. 30,000 people do, and 30,000 probably with the other academies and so forth. They aspire to be there. Now, why would anybody? Because it is the toughest education that you'll ever go through. There people yell at you. You don't really have much choice about what it is you're going to do because they tell you what you're going to do, and they tell you how to do it and so forth and so on. Why would people do that? Because I think people aspire, for something better than themselves, and they're willing to pay the price. And so I think, oftentimes we keep, in an effort to try to get people, to join our movement, whatever that movement might be, we try to lower the bar low enough so that they can get over it because we just really want them to come in. This is like really important. And so we'll just lower, is this enough to get you in? Do we have to do this to get you in? Do we have to do this to get you in? And we kind of lower the bar. Maybe what we need to do is we need to raise the bar and say, if you want to look like this, what our goal for you, and this is a guy that we work with, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but there's a guy that we work with that works with troubled young kids, men, boys, and basically his place is the last stop between penitentiary and life. It's somewhat kind of a normal life. And so the judge will say, okay, you've got two choices here. You can go 30 years at the penitentiary, or you can go to youth reach. It's your choice. But that's it. There are no options. And they come to youth reach, and these guys are just really tough guys. And they've been guilty of some horrible crimes, and they end up showing it that this guy's, and it's the most extraordinary ministry that I know of, honestly. The transformation that occurs, I could take you to youth reach, and I would show you some of these people that have been involved by this incredible ministry, and you would say, these are some of the sharpest guys I've ever seen in my life. Honestly, really just incredible kids, and you kind of, what in the world happened here? But one time, one guy was getting ready to leave, and Kurt Williams, who's the director of this, looked at the guy and he says, I'm sorry that you're going to make this choice because it meant going to jail, but he says, I can't stay here. He says, because let me tell you what I aspired, what I wanted to see you look like, because I had every dream of you being, married and children and productive and all that. And he says, that you just shattered my dream. And the kid eventually stayed and, graduated. But I think, when we talk to people, people that are in universities that they're longing to find life and they don't know what life is, they see it in a different ways. But if you could create a vision of this is what our organization, we'd love for you to come to know Christ, but let me tell you what life in Christ looks like and demonstrate it in some ways. And I think you might find people more intrigued than not. So, okay, we've got to move quickly. All right, number 2, so we create a profile, the picture of the ideal. Number 2 is we assess. An assessment means that we take our ideal, okay, and we lay it alongside reality. Okay, this is reality as best we know it. This is what it is that we really long to do, and we're going to give ourselves a grade. Okay, so we're just going to give a little bit of a subjective exercise here, but we're going to give ourselves a grade from A through D. A is that, I think we're doing a great job. I think everything we're doing is really leading to this. Okay, that would be an A. B is I think we're on our way, but we're not there yet, but we're making some good progress. C would be we're kind of there, but there's a lot missing. And D is, what? I mean, we don't even, there's nothing that even looks like this, okay? So the next step is assessment. The third step is quantification. And in quantification, what we're saying is, okay, you gave yourself a C. Why did you give yourself a C? And you say, that's easy, because these 3 things don't exist, or these 6 things don't exist. And so you make a list of all the reasons why you're a C and not a B, or a B and not an A. And then the next step is prioritization. And in prioritization, we're saying, okay, of these 6 things that are missing, which are the most critical? And so you say, well, this would be certainly number 1, this would be number 2, and this would be number 3, and this would be number 4, and this would be number 5, and this would be number 6. And so now you have a prioritized list. And let me just remind you, when we talk about strategic planning, I've already said this, that the defining characteristic of a strategic plan is that it's quantifiable. In other words, you need to have a plan that basically tells you that when you get something done, you cross it off and you go on to the next thing. And if you can't quantify it, if you can't measure it, you don't have a plan. What you have is a good idea. And there are a lot of organizations that have great ideas, but they don't have plans. And so the beauty of this particular model is it yields the kind of quantification that you need in order to be able to measure success towards your goal of where it is that you want to go. Now, number 5, and you see we don't even really get down to the planning process until number 5. And that is, now we create a plan. Now, in the process of planning, generally you're planning several things. What we did in California just a few weeks ago is we started out creating the profile. And then we measured it. We said we gave ourselves a C-. We quantified it. We had like 17 things that basically didn't exist. We prioritized them in terms of their importance to us. And then we began to put together a plan. And out of that plan emerged other initiatives that we were going to do within the organization that weren't being done now, that basically would facilitate the likelihood of these things becoming reality. And so we went through the process again and how we're going to do that. So it's an ongoing process. It just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, the next step is organization. And that's, getting, teams together, people that are going to become a part of helping you to achieve these objectives. And usually those teams are going to be a lot of volunteers that are under the direction of someone who knows, where it is we want to go and what it is that we want to get accomplished. And so we're going to organize. We're going to organize ourselves to get it done. And then after we get all the organization in place, then we're going to pull the trigger. We're going to implement. And then it's kind of circuitous in the terms that we're going to evaluate. We're going to constantly evaluate how the progress that we're making towards the plan. Now, as we talked about, we're going to come back to this because I want to, but you remember what we did yesterday in terms of the pyramid. Here you've got the mission. Here you've got the vision. And now you have the strategic plan. So basically, your planning initiatives, typically, basically driven by the cost of implementing them. In other words, we may go through this process and we say to ourselves that in order for us to accomplish, the outcomes that we want, it's going to take us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and it's going to cost us, basically we're anticipating that the cost to the organization might be, let's say, $1 million, and it might be $100 million. But actually, these numbers are going down these days because people are realizing that we might have been able at one time to raise $100 billion, but now we can't. And so they're people are thinking differently in relationship to a lot of things, and I think that's really, really healthy. So we say we're going to get these 3 things done. There's the quantification part. And so what we do is we try to blend in all the areas where we did planning, take all the initiatives, put them into packages that basically we know we can fund and we know we can succeed. Because if you can't succeed, then all of a sudden the attitude continuum takes place, doesn't it? Now we're moving over into another area because they didn't get it again. My perspective is that you told us we were going to do this and it's not happening. And so now they move towards cynicism. And they're like the people that said, that laugh hysterically when they talk about the plan of 2008, because this one was really a weird one and nothing ever happened. And so, while it didn't happen, from a organizational standpoint, what did happen was the loss of confidence of the people that you need to take you where you want to go. See, there are 2 disasters of failure. And so you really, as much as you can prevent failure from happening, and it's you can't obviously totally do it, but it would be irresponsible to say we're going to do all this and it's going to cost us $1 million this year, and we never raise more than $50,000 in any given year. You're almost setting yourself up for disaster. Now, this is what we're going to deal with tomorrow, because it's this series of steps that basically is going to make the difference. And that is, this is the development plan. This is what you are essentially, being tasked to do as leaders of organizations with responsibilities in the area of development, is to create a plan to make sure that all the resources that are needed over here are available when you need them. In other words, the dollars, the time, the people, all these people this has got to happen. And if this didn't happen, this won't happen, which means that, your plan won't be complete, it won't become reality, and consequently now you're dealing with a whole new set of problems which are basically reflected in the attitude continuum. Okay? Now, think about this. I mean, just as a planning model, and I'll give you an example of, Sue and I, have a big anniversary coming up, and so we're deciding, what do we want to do for our anniversary? So we're the first thing we do is we just kind of sit down. We sat down in the back deck of our house the other day, and we're saying, if what would be the perfect celebration? What would be really, really neat that we'd really both enjoy? That would be a neat way to be able to celebrate all these wonderful years that God has given us together. And so we came up with like 5 options. 5 things that we could do. And but we started. First of all, we just started with profile. This is what it is, and all of these options kind of had segments of it that were appealing. Some didn't have them all, and so forth. So we assessed all the options, put them in an order. We quantified them in terms of which one we liked the most. We decided on one, and now we're in the process of planning. And we're organizing now. I guess we're down to this part because Sue's getting things together. And we're going to fly in August to Copenhagen and get on a ship and go up the west coast of Norway. That's kind of like been on my bucket list and her bucket list for a lot of years. And I think, well, this would be a good vacation. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to go up and see some of you guys in Norway. But after that. But anyway, that's the way it works. Now, there is this, guys in the room. I made a huge mistake one time, and I just want to give you kind of a little heads up on it. Don't do this, okay? So this is like, big mistake, don't do it. Sue and I are driving down the road. This is like 10 years ago or so, or 15 years ago. And we're driving down the road, and we're kind of talking. And it was a long trip, like one of these long trips. It's just like really boring, because it was just flat roads going, nowhere but through fields of corn and soybeans. And so And we had not talked for maybe 100 miles or 50 miles. We were just kind of going on. And I said, hey, Sue, I got this great idea. She says, oh, really, what? And I said, let's profile the perfect husband. You really don't want to go there, okay? Just, here, take a little bit of heads up for you guys. Don't go there. This is really not the place you want to go. And she says, well, that would be fun. And I'm thinking, oh, gosh. And part of my reason in saying that, quite frankly, was arrogantly. I thought I was like, number one anyway, and I was just going to, and she was just going to say, oh, yeah, Jerry, this is great, and I'm going to really feel proud and arrogant and so forth. And so the first 7 things out of her voice, were just like A plus, The The perfect husband doesn't try to solve all my problems. Oh, what do you mean by that? And she says, that's the problem, Jerry. You want to solve everybody's problems. And you don't have to give an answer to everything. And then she reminded me that she's reasonably intelligent. And I don't need your opinion. I just really like to share with you. And there's something about women that I've never understood. Maybe you guys can help me. When a man says the other day, he is referring to something that happened the other day, like last week or maybe a few days ago. When a woman says the other day, it could be 15 years ago. And they never forget. So we're having this conversation, and I'm really now, I'm moping a little bit. I'm feeling really bad about myself. I think I'm a really horrible husband and so forth. And so I'm just, I'm quiet. I'm not saying too much. And she's kind of going on because I asked her to. And so she's kind of going on and clarifying things for me. And she said, the other day, you came home from a business trip. Well, that happens like every week, all right? So the other day I came home, and she said, you asked me how my week was. And I said, it was horrible. And then I asked you, or you asked me why it was horrible, and I told you that I went to a church meeting and somebody said something offensive to her, and it was a friend of ours. And while she was talking, and I will admit that this was probably the stupidest thing I have ever done in my life, but while she was talking, I was dialing a number. And she says, what are you doing? I says, don't. And the guy gets on the phone. I mean, it's lucky I'm still alive. I mean, this was not Jerry's smartest day. It was his longest day. And so I'm saying, hey, Larry, hey, Jerry here. Yeah. Oh, yeah, well, Sue was talking about that. Yeah. Yeah, well, I knew that, Larry. Yeah, well, yeah, golf? Yeah, what time? 3? Okay, see you then. Well, it just really wasn't good after that. That wasn't something I should have done, and it didn't work out real well for me. So, guys, just don't go there. And, later she said a little bit later, let's profile the perfect wife. And I says, you're perfect. You're perfect, honey. We don't need to go any further. Nothing.
Was that the biggest mistake?
Well, it got real funny, but about 10 years later, I mean, it actually wasn't probably that long. It was about a few years later. I came home. How's your day? Week? Horrible. Really? Tell me about it. Well, this happened. I said, oh gosh, that's terrible. What'd you do? Cried. Well, yeah, I guess I probably would have cried too. And we talked about it for a half an hour. And I said, there's a couple of things that I've learned in life, because since I travel a lot, when I say I'm going to go into my office for a minute, and sometimes it's like 8 hours, that's not really a good thing to do. You really don't want to do that. She's waiting for we're going to go do something, and you're still working. So I said, I've got about 15 minutes of work to do. I'm getting good. I'm getting better. I have listened. I'm going to go into my office. I'm going to work for 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, I'm going to be done. Let's go do something today. She says, okay. So I go into my office. I'm working 13 minutes. I'm looking at my watch. She stands in the doorway, big tears rolling down her eyes. I said, what's wrong, honey? She says, that was just the best conversation we've ever had. I said, I didn't say anything. That's why it was the... So anyway, but it's a great planning model. It is a wonderful planning model. But what happened in California, which I thought was really, really very neat, and honestly, it was I thought, when I left, it was one of the best exercises that we had done, is that they looked at where they wanted to go. They were assessing what they were doing now from a curricular standpoint and all the other things that they were doing in their school. And they realized that none of those things, they had the power of creating change, but they weren't utilizing that power. It wasn't that they needed to change anything. They just needed to make sure that the things that they were doing were really pointing in the right direction and enabling, and so they're asking, coaches and music teachers and teachers, to talk about not only, this is where it is we want to go, but now they're talking to a first grade teacher or a third grade teacher saying, okay, how are you going to contribute to that so that we have the likelihood that this is going to happen in the future? And they're doing it all the way down the line. And virtually what happened, which is the point that I want to make that I hope is encouraging to you, that virtually what happened is they created a plan, and the cost of implementing that plan was like, and this is an organization that probably has a $6 or $7 million budget. It probably was not going to cost more than $150,000, which kind of validates, I think, my point is that the difference between good and great doesn't cost money. And we think if we had better facilities, it's like the divorce or the person the couple that's right on the edge of divorce, and they just can't get along. They're just everything's going wrong in their relationship, and so finally they agree to go and talk to a pastor, and they go to the pastor and they say, well, pastor, our marriage is just falling apart, things aren't working, and the pastor says, well, do you have any idea why? And he says, oh yeah, what we need is a larger house, and you're scratching your head saying, what? Let's kind of go back and kind of rework that again. Because the point is, a larger house isn't going to make you better any more than a big facility is going to make you better. Any more than, the one thing that we're missing in order to be able to have a great ministry is we don't have a venue, appropriate venue, or you can just go on and on and on and on and on. But that's not your problem. Honestly, it's not the problem. You can get by on an awful little and have a great ministry. And I can take you to a gazillion of them that look just like that. But somehow we've developed a mentality that, and I think we can thank Kevin Costner for this in the Field of Dreams. If you'll build it, they will come. Well, Kevin Costner isn't God, and if you build it, doesn't mean they're going to come. And so the realities are, if you produce, and if you consistently produce, they will be pounding on your door. They'll be pounding on your door because this is a place that I can get what it is that I need and I want and I long for myself. So planning is just like an important, we use it all the time. Every day I'm doing something, having to do with, but I'm sitting around, in terms of going to a meeting with a couple of people that want to talk to me. And I know what the agenda is. I just say, well, I'll sit in the parking lot and just pray and say, Lord, what do I want to walk away with this looking like? If this was a successful meeting and they walked away with something, what would they walk away with? And you know what happens? Well, first of all, I make a list of the things that I want to happen. So that kind of directs the conversation, doesn't it? This is what I'm going to be talking about. And you know what else it directs? The bridges. The bridges. Because I just don't want to end the meeting. I just want to keep the conversation going. And so I'm sitting down for 5 minutes in the parking lot, before I go into the restaurant, doing two things. What do I want the result to look like? What I want them to leave with? And what are the bridges going to be? And so it's a productive conversation rather than just a, hey, how you doing? Things going all right? That kind of a thing. And that's what most of our meetings are, and they're not productive because they don't take us anywhere, except growing a relationship, and I'm not suggesting that that's bad at all.